Welcome back to the Hogtown Podcast, episode 54, says Natasha. 54. Feels like it's been a little bit of time since we...
Yeah, I mean, specifically, the last time we recorded, we were going to committee that day. So I know it was March 5th because that was our committee hearing.
Right. So 3 weeks ago. Yeah.
3 weeks ago. So yeah, we promised in that episode to come back the following week, and we failed to do so. So here we are 3 weeks later.
Yeah,
Things are busy.
Well, things are busy at work, but it does feel like in the news, maybe because like the province only got back into session this week. Like it doesn't feel like there's a ton going on in the news. We have some things we'll go through today, but I don't know. I think they start picking up now, like April, May is kind of like when you start seeing.
Well, and I mean, there's the last week has been a lot of things coming out of Doug Ford, particularly. Like there's a lot of like little one-offs, like the Science Center plans and the potential for a new convention center and all these things that people have been following. But there's some stuff that's specific to what's going on in housing that we can dive into. And
well, maybe we could start by saying that, because you're right. Last time we published an episode, we were going to committee for our project at Glen Park. This is like a 3-lot, 27-unit project by the Glen subway station. It was approved.
It was approved with like effectively no opposition. The only real opposition had to do with like permit parking on the streets.
Yeah, we showed up to committee with Greg Ewens at Batory and Valerie at Batory, and I didn't expect anyone to show up. And then he went and he talked to the scheduler or whatever and said we have 6 registered speakers.
And we were anxious, but
but then they were all actually like pretty positive about the proposal itself, and then had concerns about street parking. But
and like the broad context on that one, which will go into construction in the near future, is that the city has, as part of its study in that area, is looking at that street as potentially up to 25 or 35 stories, and we go in and propose 3 stories, right? So it's hard to argue.
The one neighbor I was a little bit concerned about texted me saying, I don't know how to log on. How do I log on so that I could say something? I said, I don't know. Sorry. I have no idea. Anyway. Okay, let's talk about the news. What do we have here? Where do you want to start?
Well, probably the biggest news, at least as it relates specifically to housing, was an announcement made yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, by the provincial government, matched by the federal government, that they're going to be waiving the HST on new homes. And this is an extension of an existing policy, but also eliminates the concept of like a first-time home buyer exemption. This is all home buyers of new construction homes, extending it for 1 year. So we can chat a little bit about that, but it is noteworthy in the sense that it applies not only to existing inventory that can be sold, so let's say existing condo units or townhouses or whatever that are sitting unsold, but also projects that somebody might purchase as a pre-construction project. So, what do you mean by extending by this? Didn't exist before, did it? There was some existing policy that they've extended by 1 year and removed the first-time homebuyer condition, and that 1 year extension also applies to purchases of pre-construction units.
Oh, what I think it was there was the GST announcement by the feds, when the province joined the mix, they extended by a year.
And there's a cutoff date. I don't want to quote this, but I think it's something like 2031. There's a cutoff date that if you were like to pre-purchase something like a pre-construction unit, it'd have to be complete by a certain end date, which I think is 2031. But anyways, that was probably the big announcement that I think a lot of people are, maybe rightfully so, giving kudos to the government. Maybe some people criticizing that it temporary relief, not permanent relief. But it's something.
It's something. For what it's worth, I had heard from some lobbyist friends who were pushing this for quite some time, that the disagreement within the province was Ford wanted to do it because it sounds like a win and he gets to cut taxes. Bethlehem Falvey did not because of the hit to the revenues. And my advice to this person was you should leak to the media that Ford's taking order from his finance minister, and then he'll say like, no, I don't take orders and do it. So I don't know if they followed that.
Well, there you go. Maybe it all started here. And actually, to me, I mean, a lot of the headlines were talking about how big of a hit this was to the Treasury, which to me is like a completely misleading way to frame this, because like these homes presumably are not being sold.
Correct.
So the HST is not being paid. And so you're sort of like squeezing blood out of a rock.
Yeah.
It's like development charges that aren't being earned by the city if nobody starts new projects, right? So it's not real revenue.
And then like downstream, this is the dynamic scoring of budgets that's hard to do accurately. Like the person who can't afford to buy a house, who this would have like tipped at the margin to buying a house, moves to Alberta. And now we also don't get their income tax, their sales tax, all these other revenues.
And, I was talking to somebody yesterday, in fact, that has a townhouse complex, a townhouse development in Toronto. And they're saying, hey, when they first launched, it was a 2-phase townhouse project. When they first launched, they were selling for 1.3. The second phase, they needed to drop that price to $999. They were still struggling. This announcement yesterday allows them to drop that second phase to $899.
Right.
So, like, it's a real meaningful number, right?
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden you get townhouses in Toronto, brand new construction that were 1.33 years ago, can now sell for $899 just to get them out of the ground and moving. Part of that is market conditions, but this sort of like last little thing, I think will nudge a few buyers over the edge.
Yeah, I think our preference with these things generally is like, if it's worth doing, do it permanently and with no cutoff, because
you need to give certainty.
You need certainty on your underwriting, but also the cutoff also introduces all this gamesmanship where they might sell it like up to that dollar, and everything above that dollar doesn't make sense, or you need to like kind of like break up the pricing.
Even the way the premier was announcing it, he was sort of like, he was using this analogy of like, it's a one-time sale, you better come now.
Yeah.
And like, to me, it's the completely wrong incentive. Like you want a market that functions efficiently all the time.
That's right.
The idea that we introduce effectively like a tax on something as fundamental as housing is already a flawed premise to begin with. It's just governments have a hard time letting go of revenues once they get used to them.
That's right.
And so this is one of those. But you know what? Let's give credit where credit is due. It's a step in the right direction. Maybe too small a step, maybe too temporary a step, but it's a step in the right direction.
One other thing the province has done, there was a Toronto Life article that I think was framed a little bit dishonestly, or well, I don't know, maybe not dishonestly, but incorrectly by Toronto Life, where it said this is the Toronto Life headline: Queen's Park has launched a $1.3 billion fund to buy unsold GTA condo inventory and convert it into affordable rental units. And then this was criticized by many commentators as being a bailout of developers. So I know you have some insight into this fund. Maybe tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, so one, just to like be accurate about it, this is not a fund that was launched by the provincial government or by Queen's Park. This is a fund that was launched by private sort of investment managers, in which the provincial government, through its Build Ontario Fund, is an investor. Of the $1.3 billion, $300 million is coming from the province. The other $1 billion is coming from private investment, which is part of the mandate of the Build Ontario Fund, is to like effectively match up and pair with private capital. The dollars going in from the government are investment dollars. They will be repaid with interest. These are debt.
Yeah.
In this context, this is not a grant. This is not money being given away,
or even equity. It's debt.
It's debt sitting in this fund. And the fund is not exclusively going out to convert condos into affordable rental units. A portion of the condo units that are purchased are being required, I think it's 25%, in fact, are going to be required to be managed as affordable rental units for a period of time.
Yeah.
And I think that period of time is 10 years. And I think there was some other conditions in there associated to things like workplace housing for government, like, healthcare workers.
Some strings attached to that. Because it's low cost debt. It's lower cost than what they'd get in the market.
And the context in my mind is sort of like, it's twofold. There's a lot of discussion about this on X, about people sort of like criticizing the government. I don't love any market that sort of gets into a position where the government has to step in, period. But we are where we are. This is not the worst use of the government's balance sheet to unblock what is a completely frozen sector of the housing market right now. Not only do these units sort of go unused right now, but the money that's tied up in these projects limits these developers from going on to the next project, right? Which means there's less capital flowing into new development, of whether it's probably less of it is going to be high-rise development, but that money can flow into low-rise development, subdivision development, whatever the market's sort of going to. But right now, a lot of that capital would have been really, really frozen up just because the market's been so slow. So I think this is a pretty efficient temporary solution to what is like an unideal situation that we're in.
Yeah, well, my sense is that, you have people who think that government should be in the business of building and owning housing and making it available at below market rate prices. You could quibble over whether or not government should do that, be in that business or not. I personally think they should not. But if they're going to be in that business, it makes much more sense to buy completed units at a discount than to build them yourself.
Yeah, of course.
We've talked about it on the podcast before, that when the government builds units, and we have very specific examples of this happening right now, we might not name them for political reasons. These are being built at twice the cost that we would build.
Yeah.
And these units are being bought not even at cost, they're being bought below cost. They're being bought for cheaper than they cost to build. So this actually, if you think the government should be in the business of owning housing that it makes available at below market rents, this is a smart way to do it. And I think that one of the misunderstandings that was common in a lot of this pushback, saying that the government is bailing out big developers. Like I saw one commentator saying, we should want these condos to be distressed so that they then get sold at a discount. It's like, yeah, these are the buyers.
Yeah, like, this is the discount buyer.
This is the discount buyer. Like that $1 billion that is not government money, they allocate those dollars because they want to buy when there's blood on the streets. So this is actually that buyer. They're just able to do it now at scale.
And it's worth noting, like, I think in a lot of these situations, and it's going to be very case by case because every project in the city's got its own sort of like economics in terms of like how underwater they are.
Yeah.
I think a lot of these units are being sold at a loss to the developers that are selling them. In the best cases, I think they're being sold at a break even on those units, but across the project.
And even that break even, well, who knows? Maybe there's been some softening of hard costs, but often break even 3 years ago is below market today.
That's right.
We're in this weird time where actually it might not be the case, but yeah.
And it to your point, it's like, can you buy units today that are completed, meaning no construction risk, no timeline risk, no planning risk, no nothing,
no everything big
for a
requirements
cost that is lower than what it would take you to build new today, right?
Totally.
So, and that's effectively the thesis behind this fund. I think, again, you wish that you weren't in the situation we were in, which is probably a lot of regulation that got us here, a lot of bad regulation that got us here. But we are in the situation we're in. This is really not a bad use of the government's balance sheet, I think, to move the needle in the right direction. So
maybe to draw one point of comparison, this is $300 million from the province that will be repaid with interest to have some of these units made affordable to people that they consider to be priority tenants. CMHC had allocated, just coincidentally, $300 million for this housing supply challenge, which was grant money to various groups that were solving the housing crisis. I think if we did like a side-by-side comparison.
Solving the housing crisis was like a pretty broad way to define what they were doing.
Yeah, I think of that $300 million, I know of like 2 projects that were kind of like interesting and maybe worth doing. But it's like the nuance I'm trying to put on this is that this could be bad objectively, but still good and smart within the context of what government spends money on.
Yeah.
Government spends money on much worse things and much more inefficiently than this.
And it is worth flagging, and we may go into this deeper in another episode, but this group out of the provincial government, the Build Ontario Fund, is a pretty unique vehicle. I mean, it's an investment structure that was created a couple of years ago to invest in a couple of priority mandates. One of them is a housing, affordable being sort of like within the umbrella of the housing mandate of the Build Ontario Fund. And those dollars are specifically being deployed with the intent to return not only the principal, but also interest on that money to drive priorities that the provincial government has stated it has, right? So, we have been often very critical of this government. This is not one of the things that I'm like the most critical of. I think it's
again all within like I would rather they just cut taxes and not do any of this. But if we have to compare it to like the alternative, the realistic alternative. The realistic alternative is Build Canada Homes, which will spend money building units. And like one thing that we've suggested on the podcast that Build Canada Homes should consider is also just buy completed units. If you can get them at a really good price, then do that.
Anyway. And to give people an order of magnitude, this fund is seeking to purchase 2,200 condo units in or around there in the city of Toronto. 2025 being probably the peak year in the city. I think the city was completing north of 20,000 units, 2026, somewhere just below that, but still a very high number. These are projects that started in like 2022.
Yeah.
So you got tens of thousands of condo units, many of which are pre-purchased, but many of those purchases will fall through because people can't close.
Totally.
And many of the units were not pre-purchased because developers typically would hold on to some inventory. They'd sell some percentage of the building, hold on to the balance. There are thousands and thousands of units that need to move. It's interesting to see what's going to play out after this. So probably the next year we'll be hearing about these transactions taking place out of this fund.
Yeah. Okay, that was interesting. Another thing that came out of the provincial government was some movement on the Billy Bishop Island Airport extension. Specifically, there's this tripartite agreement governing the airport between all 3 levels of government. And
no, specifically not the provincial government.
Sorry, the owner, Porter.
It was like something like the Port Authority, the city of Toronto, and the federal government.
Okay.
But it didn't include the province.
And the province effectively expropriated, or I don't know if it's actually happened, but announced their intention to expropriate city land, just to take the city out of that consideration, because My guess is the fact that the province is moving on this. There's already been communication from the feds that they would support the extension. So yeah, this is another thing that's kind of kicking up a lot of dust in Toronto politics and commentary.
Not a new idea. The idea that the island airport is
No.
in need of modernization and expansion.
Well, the last time this was proposed, it was ultimately vetoed by Justin Trudeau,
That's right.
And in a way that was interpreted by many people as kind of like the bone he threw Adam Vaughan, who moved from municipal to federal politics at the time, largely just to get this one thing
Adam
done.
Vaughan, who now lobbies for Thermal Spa or for on the Ontario Place redevelopment.
That's actually hilarious. Yeah, you're right. He works for Navigator and he lobbies on behalf of Therme for the Ontario Place redevelopment. But he was the guy responsible with Trudeau's support for blocking the airport extension. I had dinner with a friend the other day, and he also mentioned that the last time this was on the table, there was a potential order from Porter to Bombardier for these C-Series jets that would have basically saved that division of Bombardier, and this effectively killed it. And now we're going to get it, but if it were done before, we could have had great revenue to a Canadian manufacturer. Yeah. This would have been like way ahead of schedule. But anyway, it sounds like we're going to get it now. My understanding is that this polls actually very well, despite how loud the opposition is, kind of formalized under this No Jets TO brand. It's a typical kind of like regional consideration versus local opposition story, where having a second airport, a downtown airport, more of a landing spot for Porter and to go to longer destinations is good for the region.
Totally.
Good for economic activity in the region. Whereas the opposition, it's in many ways fair, but this is like the reality of living in a big city, is that these planes will be a bit louder than.
And if I remember from the original debate, and I suspect it's similar considerations now, the specific jet that they were talking about was like a specifically designed sort of quieter jet.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's still a jet. It's still louder than a propeller
the
plane.
marketing term, which we will acknowledge is a marketing term, was whisper jets.
Right.
I'm sure they didn't whisper. But yeah, the idea was that they're under some like decibel threshold.
Yeah.
One of the tactics, or one of the, I don't want to be unfair to the side. A lot of people we know and like really don't like this. One of the tactics they're using, or one of the points they're making, is that this could limit maximum heights in the Portlands, which is planned for redevelopment. And they're kind of framing this as like Doug Ford is using the airport extension to like
block heights
the Portlands, which to me feels like a total false choice, whether we could have housing or a downtown airport. If you look at the Portlands map, there's actually a new Indigenous name for it, which I forget. There's a lot of green, like way too much green in my mind. And you could have
it's these massively wide new avenues with too many lanes. And
that's right.
Too much separation between buildings.
Maybe, Natasha, I don't know if this is something we know how to do in post-production, put like a map of the Portland. So we'll put it up so that you could see what I'm talking about. Where
you could redesign the Portlands to lower heights.
You could, with more density. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You could do that all day long. Never mind.
And make it a better neighborhood.
Yeah. Never mind going into like Leslieville and Riverdale, all these parts of the city that could also use more density. So like housing versus jets is a total false choice.
That's right.
And I think it's fine to oppose the island airport extension. Alex Bezikovich thinks that it's like an attack on the island as being a park. You could have that, like, these are trade-offs you have to make.
Doug Ford calls these people squatters, right?
Well, to be fair to Alex, he wasn't saying it's an attack on island residents, but on the idea that the whole island could be like our central park.
Yeah.
That's, you could fall on whatever side of that trade-off you want.
But I've never seen, I saw that idea pop up in the Globe and Mail, and it was like, I've never seen a real discussion around getting rid of the island airport. So to me, that's never really been one of the debated options. Let's get rid of it and make the park bigger.
I haven't seen that either.
It's like, hey, if the default is we're keeping it, but we're keeping it like in a small, insignificant version of itself, I'd be happy to have the debate of like, should we have an epic park?
Yeah.
Or a great airport, but like being in the middle of those two, where we have a crappy airport.
Well, I think the truth is we could have both, and the park won't be like hanging out at your cottage in Muskoka. It'll be an urban park with like the noise of an airport, of being next to a city, but also the park, the island itself is big enough that the airport's not disruptive to all of it. I don't know, like Canada's been stagnant economically for 10 years. There's like a pretty high unemployment rate in Toronto, and it's rising. The idea that we could just like do more things to juice the economy and certainly connectivity to more.
This can only be positive for the economy in Toronto and in Southern Ontario, period.
Yeah.
And from that perspective alone, I mean, I think you're right. I think the polling is supportive of this. I think the numbers are something like Billy Bishop today gets about 2 million people a year going through the airport. They're expecting this goes up to about 10 million.
Yeah, big jump.
Big jump. People are saying, "Oh, what about the traffic at Bathurst and Queens
Fix
Quay?"
that.
It's like, fix it. All right, redesign Bathurst and Queens Quay. These are solvable problems.
By the way, it has to be redesigned
right?
anyway. It's a horrible intersection.
Yeah, so like all of these things to me is just growing a city.
That's right. And the competitive pressure it places on Pearson to kind of like step their game up. This is to me, this
big
is all
cities
good stuff.
end up with more than one airport in most cases, right?
That's right.
Like, so you want to grow into being a big city.
It's just through historical and geographic reasons. All inconveniently located, like many cities have inconvenient. Like this is
too
actually,
far out of the city.
This is actually a very conveniently located, with one caveat that like we probably do need better transit connection.
But I think now, once the plan's in motion, all of a sudden now you start thinking about transit. You start thinking about redoing roads. All of that stuff. So I think this is a great announcement. I think it'll do good things for the city.
I remember Pierre Poilievre when he was running for, I don't know if it was for leader. No, I think it was past the leadership race when it was like general election time. His first video actually was
at
Billy Bishop Airport.
Right.
So and again, like
try to cast the distinction against Justin Trudeau at the time, because I don't think you're going to get that same opposition from Mark Carney. I've heard from some Liberal MPs that they're trying to be politically smart to say, oh, we want to get the input from Toronto residents. Well, to me, it's bigger than that.
The one thing I'll say a few things in favor of Mark Carney. One of them is that like he knows not to listen to these people.
And it's also worth noting that this is not like a Toronto opposes this for the benefit of Ontario. This is a very small number of people who like out of their window see the lake. What percentage of the city out of their window sees also in that proximity to the lake?
There's some share of people who see the lake out of their window who like jets, having and like travel for work and like having an airport down the block.
Anyways, it sounds to me like it's like the way I view this is that the city used to hold a veto on this. That veto has effectively been eliminated. Now the province wants to see it happen. So it won't be because of the province that it doesn't happen. If it doesn't happen, it'll be because some other level of government.
It's still ultimately up to the feds. But again, like I have to imagine that this step was taken having de-risked where the feds will land on it.
This sort of like pairs a little bit off track in terms of our focus, but the convention center, the science center, like have you been following that story? What's your take on? It seems like all of this stuff is loosely correlated.
So Eric Lombardi actually made a pretty good case or a pretty good comment on the convention center. I think the idea of a larger convention center is great. I think Doug Ford's best instinct is to build more cool things. Where he falls short is in like project management and execution. And we pay way too much for these things, and they're often not carefully planned for. But people who are opposing this saying that we don't need more event space, like, well, actually we do need more event space, and if we want to track larger conventions and conferences, like we need more event space. Rob Ford, when he was mayor, Doug's brother, had a plan to redevelop the current convention center to be bigger and better. And I don't know why that's not on the table, because now the plan is to kind of like move it out of the way. And Eric Lombardi's comment was that you want it to be near a traffic node, like the convention center is to Union. So I like the idea of building a new, awesome, big convention center. I don't know why it's being kind of put a little bit further out of the way.
You don't know enough about the economics of convention centers, but do you know if it's normal that this is always sort of a government initiative?
No, that I don't know either.
Why does the province have to build a convention center? Why, if there's a market for it?
It's a good question, because even, like one answer might be that municipal planning is just too hard to navigate, but you could MZO it on behalf of a private developer. So actually, no, I don't know. Maybe that's another way in which
the science center, the convention center, it's sort of like we're defaulting to this idea that we can only build big infrastructure things.
Museums are less. Yeah, but I think museums, it makes more sense, right? They're more like, museums are like nice community centers, whereas convention centers are purely commercial. Like, they only make sense to expand if they could be expanded profitably. So that I don't know. Having the science center move from its current location at what was the street? Eglinton and Downsview? Don
Mills?
Don Mills. By Flemington. Downtown, somewhere kind of more central. I don't hate it. One of the reasons why some people hate it is because they love the architecture of the old Science Center. I actually don't like the architecture of the old Science
I don't
Center.
like the architecture of the new proposed one.
I don't like the city. That's fair. I also don't like the architecture, or at least the rendering of the new one. But I just don't think we were losing so much.
Yeah.
And moving it more centrally, I think, makes sense. So,
although there is a valid criticism that Ontario Place is theoretically central, but practically not that accessible. You know how to get to and from Ontario
we are going to
Place,
get.
but
That's true, and the traffic is going to be horrible. It already is. We are going to get an Ontario Line station there. We do have the exhibition
on the north side of the X.
Yeah, so you need to like improve the pedestrian connection, and we'll see what the timeline is on the Ontario
A lot
line.
of this feels like it's avoiding just taking over the X from the city and reusing that land because
that's yeah. This is also like a broad theme with the city and kind of municipal activists getting mad at the province. To some extent, you have to ask the city, like, what have you done with these assets?
Yeah.
What have you done with the exhibition grounds? What have you done with the island generally? What have you done with the lakeshore? And it's like there's this discussion now as to whether or not Toronto needs more constitutional power to not be overridden all the time by the province. And I think that argument would be much easier to make if there was a track record of competent execution on big projects.
That's right.
And like, I'm not seeing it. And
I mean, I think there was a discussion on this in council yesterday. And Olivia Chow's response was like, it's out of our hands. And the only vote that council could come up with that to me is a meaningless vote was asking the city solicitor to investigate all legal options available to the city.
That's a bone to their constituents. They know it's nonsense.
Because the province has absolute legal authority here and even political authority. If the polling's in support and nobody sees the city doing anything.
That's right.
I mean, we walked through the X grounds, 2 weeks ago on our way to Medieval Times with the kids. It's a desolate parking lot.
Totally
it's like what a waste of wasted asset.
Going back to the Portlands, like the current master plan, I think is just like not.
Yeah, it's awful.
It's not making use of what could be a great new neighborhood, basically maybe adjacent to our downtown.
The optimistic take is if the airport does happen, the expansion that is, maybe there's like a forced reviewing of how to approach planning.
I hope you're right. Like and again, I'm saying things that even a lot of people I like don't agree with me on, but like the whole Portlands feels like it was designed by people who don't like cities. People who like the minute that, it's 5 o'clock on a Friday, they leave to Muskoka and only come back 9 a.m. on Monday. Like there's billboards. We drive through this every week. There's like billboards on like you'll be able to canoe in the Portlands, and it's just like like you've been to Chicago, like the Chicago River with these like patios on like on the bank of the river, and these like ferries, and there's bridges across, and it's urban and it's dense, and there's shops. Like
nobody's canoeing in the Chicago River.
That's a city. That's a real city. This like winding river that you could canoe down, and there's so much green space between you and any housing or signs of life that you could feel like you're in Muskoka. I don't know. Maybe we could just let the city be a city, and in the meantime, like have more urban neighborhoods and more housing options and all these other things. I think there's so much opportunity in the Portlands just because of how big it is and how close it is to downtown. And
how often do you get like that kind of blank canvas? I mean, people who listen to the episode we did with Alicia Peterson on the urban courtyard and courtyard urbanism, I should say, like you never get this blank canvas in the city to say,
like,
hey, let's start from scratch, right? Yeah, and like this is one and done. Like you get it wrong, you can never do it again.
And it's not just like, by the way, I'm looking at, and we'll put the image back up again, the Portlands plan. It's not just like a nice park for people to have. It's like marshland. It's like recreating nature. And it's like this is not nature. This is a city. Let's recreate a city in the city. Like look at this.
Yeah, it's wild.
You could and by the way, I like parks. I love parks, and the public loves parks, and we should deliver what the public wants. You don't need this much downtown.
Well, the irony of this is that the same people advocating for this are the people that don't want to build a bridge to the island there.
That's right.
Island,
yeah.
Where we have a great park.
If you want a park, build a bridge to the island.
Guess what? The Portlands is right beside the island. Yeah. Build a bridge, and then all of a sudden you can get there, right? So you can bike over to the island.
So going back to the point that
there's a crazy amount of green as
we have and have had, and again, a lot of it is just like unusable green.
Yeah, it's just marshy green.
We have and have had many criticisms of the provincial government. In my case, at least, and maybe the same for you, it's mostly been criticisms of things that they should do that they're not doing.
In some cases, things they're doing that are too expensive. Yeah,
much too expensive, but they're still doing, nevertheless. The only way to put up a credible alternative way of rearranging the power balance between the city and the province is to have the city be better at what it does. And we're making some small steps in the right direction. Even this plan actually 5 years ago was much worse in terms of delivering less on the opportunity. So we're moving in the right direction, but like we're not there yet.
Yeah. All right. Well, something to watch.
Okay. So sorry, let me go back to our docket here. Oh yeah, Fast Track TO. I wanted to give a quick plug. There was this project that was done.
This is interesting. Some of the points I didn't fully understand. Maybe you do, but
so this was a couple of friends and some other contributors. So Jonathan English, who I think when I first met him, he worked at the Toronto Region Board of Trade, and Reese Martin, who's a transit whiz. He's like a YouTuber, writer, but just a guy who is like really in the weeds on transit. They both are, along with some other guys, put together this website called Fast Track TO. The first thing they identified, which was a bit shocking to me, but not
fast-track.to for people who want to check it out.
Shocking, but not too surprising, sadly, is that Toronto has the slowest streetcars in the world.
It's a wild statement, and the fact that it's true is just crazy.
Think about, like, there are a lot of poor, dysfunctional places in the world with streetcars, and our streetcars are slower than theirs are. So they put together this plan recommending 10
and then
steps.
We built an LRT slower than a streetcar up on Finch, so we won't even bring that into the conversation.
Yeah. And again, like if anybody's really interested in transit commentary, Reese Martin especially, both Jonathan English and Reese Martin are very smart, but Reese does a lot more internet content. He's very good on this stuff. So it's basically like a 10-point plan on speeding the streetcar network up. And the interesting thing about this, I won't read every point because maybe just check out the website, fast.track.to, is that these points kind of highlight things that I didn't even know were in place, like these like safety requirements to move super slow that are not the case in any other, even like modern, safe country.
And the encouraging thing, as you read through them, the ones I understood, frankly, because some of them are a bit technical, the encouraging thing is that a lot of these are doable without revisiting the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Like the infrastructure exists. Let's accept that it exists. I've got my criticisms of streetcars in many contexts in the city.
Totally.
But it's there, and we're not going to convince the city to rip it out. And so, like, how do you make it faster on its existing infrastructure? And these are, like, pretty practical recommendations.
And maybe we even do an episode around this so we can really get into it. But it kind of also, like, points to the idea, this is, like, you know, something we harp on in housing. There's no one silver bullet. Like, these systems have become so regulated and complex that it's really, like, you need to do at least 10 things.
Well, my view on streetcars has always been, like, I think by design, they're supposed to be a more efficient way of moving people than buses. Yeah. But in practice, they're worse than buses in most parts of the city because they're stuck in traffic all the time because they can't change lanes, right? So,
that's right.
So you need to get to a point where if the streetcar is not delivering faster transit than buses, you need to get it to be faster than buses. If not, it defeats the whole purpose of having a streetcar network to begin with, right? Yeah. Even now, the TTC, you'll notice when they put up their transit maps, it used to be just like, you know, the two lines. Now they add streetcar lines to the transit maps. It's like, okay, if you want us to view them as rapid transit, then make them rapid transit.
That's right. Yeah.
They're not rapid right now.
We should get Reese on, actually. This would be a good episode. And
let's do that.
He's really an expert on this stuff.
So let's not go into it in detail today. We'll keep that for another episode.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. There was this funny story out of Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. Maybe you could tee that one up.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't dig into this a lot, but sort of a silly, I'm sure there's fault to be spread around, but this was a story. The CBC covered this a couple of weeks back. There was a developer in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, which for people who haven't been out to Nova Scotia is effectively part of Halifax, but it's like on the other side of the river. You know, in some other alternative, it would have been like an amalgamated city. So it's like
the Gatineau.
Yeah, it's the Gatineau of Ottawa or the Mississauga of Toronto or whatever. Yeah. It's the Dartmouth to Halifax. This looks, just looking at the picture of the building, something like a 12-story building that they ended up building to 14 stories, and the last 2 stories had not been permitted. They were not part of their zoning permissions, nor their building permits, and they built it. And the city council voted to force the developer to reduce the height of the building, meaning to demolish the top 2 stories of the building.
So the decision, because the original story was that they had built these 2 additional stories. So the zoning permission was for 10. They built 12.
That's right.
And like when this was identified, presumably by an inspector or even a neighbor, it was
somebody counted.
It was like oops, you know, it was like a total bullshit thing that the developer said.
Yeah, pretty blatant on the developer's part, which is.
And then there was this debate, you know, on one hand, there's a lot of housing pressure in Halifax and in Dartmouth. Like, should we allow it? And it's like, why are we demolishing housing when we need more housing? On the other hand, like, what signal does this send as to the enforceability of our zoning bylaw? I think, like, you know, I'm of 2 minds of this. On one hand, I think that you need people
follow the
largely
rules.
playing by the rules. If not, it's just anarchy. And like, even if you disagree with certain rules, like we can't have everyone making that determination on every one of these rules. On the other hand, this should prompt a reconsidering of the rules, because like the only reason there's hesitation here is because we know the rule is kind of dumb. If I could build 10 stories, think about the impact on shadow, on neighbors of whatever, 10 stories. The marginal impact of an additional 2 stories is basically nothing.
Yeah.
But it delivers more housing. And if you multiply that across other projects, then it delivers a lot more housing. So on one hand, I think that you do need to follow the rules, and I think ultimately they had to like force. I think
the penalty was inappropriate.
I don't know if they had to force a demolition. They could have forced like a major payment, or like they like seize those units and rent them out affordably or something like that. It feels less wasteful than demolishing.
This feels very wasteful. So
that I totally agree on. You needed some penalty for this, but I think the more fundamental thing is like somebody was put this on LinkedIn and said like if they let the developer go and get away with this, what next? And I joked, I'm like, if they let this developer build more housing, then maybe other developers will build more housing, as in like, yeah, we should want that. So like, I think you do need to like,
well, to me, like the reason somebody would do this is they think there's an incentive to get away with it. The penalty should have been just to kill that incentive.
Sure.
Penalize them enough that whatever additional profit they might have made is gone.
That's right.
Or take the units back as affordable units for the city. Right. Now, they didn't profit from it, but like demolishing it seems like pretty nuts.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is sort of virtue signaling coming out of the Dartmouth City Council. But anyways, it's an interesting story because you don't see these every day. And now there'll be this completed building in Dartmouth that's in the process of getting its top 2 floors demolished.
In the middle of like in Dartmouth, actually, housing is actually very tight. We went out there to tour a couple of projects. It's like they need more housing. So it is kind of crazy. Markham, another kind of like out of Toronto story.
Yeah, I mean this one's noteworthy for a couple of reasons. So so people will remember that a couple of years ago, the province passed strong mayor powers, largely targeted towards the large cities. They eventually expanded which cities got access to these strong mayor powers, which effectively, in theory, these powers are supposed to empower mayors to move the needle forward on big files like housing.
Well, not even in theory. The policy, the strong mayor policy requires or limits these powers to only be used on items that advance provincial priorities. And I think the only 2 provincial priorities that were identified are 1, increasing housing supply, and 2, increasing construction of infrastructure that supports more housing.
That's right. So with that in mind, strong mayor powers, these mayors are going to use those powers to advance the housing agenda. The mayor of Markham used the strong mayor powers in the last month to effectively force a ban on citywide permissions for fourplexes in the city of Markham.
That's right.
So that's one reason that this was noteworthy. I mean, Markham, just north of Toronto, naturally gets a lot of housing pressure. The other reason this is noteworthy is that the city of Markham also had an agreement with the federal government under the Housing Accelerator Fund to
do fourplexes,
do certain things, including fourplexes.
Yeah.
And this is sort of on the back of the city of Toronto failing to go through with its 6-plex permission citywide, and the federal government barely penalizing the city.
Yeah, there was
and people were sort of questioning, hey, if you barely penalize the city, are you creating an incentive for other municipalities to go against their signed agreements with the feds? And this seems like the first example of a city saying, it doesn't matter what we agreed to with the feds. The dollars have already been transferred over and they're barely going to penalize us anyways. So let's roll this back because it's politically unpopular. So
I think this is a big test of both the federal and provincial government, but I'm specifically thinking of the provincial government because strong mayor powers were required to get this done. And again, strong mayor powers were limited to these 2 provincial priorities. And the way that the mayor kind of spun it is the second priority is enabling development and construction of infrastructure that supports more housing. And he basically said this 4-plex permission, citywide 4-plex permission, would strain the transportation network in a way that is adversely impacting infrastructure. But it's kind of like the whole thing was about enabling more housing, not less. So my interpretation is that this was like an improper and potentially illegal use of strong mayor powers.
And now it's up to the province to decide that.
Yeah, and even the fact that like we don't have resolution on this yet. Like, when did this happen? This happened a couple of weeks ago. We don't even have a signal out of the province.
And it hasn't really been like brought up much in the media since then. I mean, it was a story for a very brief moment.
So we'll see if they do anything. They should. We'll track it and report back. But what the province should do is just kind of override this, because this is not what the strong mayor powers were intended to do.
It's also worth noting that, like, when people think of fourplexes in the context of Toronto or 6-plexes, they're often thinking of like 20 to 25 foot lots where you're squeezing a bunch of apartments into a small lot. You go into places that are a little bit more suburban, like Markham, And often you're looking at larger lots, and a fourplex can be like really large units in like a really large developed complex. Like there's some really creative uses, like where severance permissions are very difficult. You can use fourplexes to effectively create 4 great condominium units inside of what is one structure. So there's like, it's not like, oh, tight urban infill rental housing in the middle of like a farm field in Markham. It's lots of just various uses. It's allowing the market to decide what to build in the right places.
Totally.
So this, to your point, it'd be interesting to see if the province does anything on this. And what the response side of Gregor Robertson is, because now there's this question of like the Housing Accelerator Fund agreement that they signed with the city.
This was always the risk with the Housing Accelerator Fund, is that it didn't have, well, there were a couple of risks. One is that they didn't ask for enough, and the second is that they didn't have enough teeth to even like secure what they did.
Sort of too easy for a city to agree, get the money, and then roll back, right? And or put in poison pills to never get there. Right?
That's right. The poison. Yeah, I think Toronto's penalty was $10 million out of a $240 million.
I thought it was $461 million was the original agreement. If I'm not mistaken,
I might be remembering wrong. Toronto agreement.
Whatever it was a small percentage. As you're pulling it up, it was a very small percentage that the penalty was, even though, by some definitions, we only allowed sixplexes in 9 out of 25 wards. So less than half the city is allowed to do sixplexes when that was a requirement of the agreement.
Yep.
And now, only 10 million of, did you get the number? Anyways, whatever the number was, hundreds of millions of dollars that were supposed to go to the city. That the city's still keeping. So City of Markham would be a smaller version of the same thing, but we'll see where the federal Minister of Housing shakes out on this.
Speaking of the city, Olivia Chow came out with an announcement that the city will no longer tolerate slumlords. She was specifically picking on this one project, which actually sounds like a really horribly managed apartment building on Dawes Road in East York, like near Main and Danforth. Again, always of two minds on these things. On one hand, good, like there should be some accountability. I mean, like the real accountability that you want for bad landlords is a market that is abundantly supplied with alternatives, so that you lose tenants if you don't do your job. And one of the downsides to having a supply constrained market, and one of the downsides of having rent control, is that you actually shift a lot more of the leverage to landlords, who could then become bad landlords, and there's very little market pressure.
Well, not only that, I don't want to defend the slumlord, but I think what people fail to realize in the rent control debate is that if you take money away from landlords, there's less money to invest in upgrades and maintenance in buildings, right? So like, the building's falling apart. Well, it's like, I haven't been able to raise my rent in 22 years, you know? So where do you think the money's going to come from to invest in upgrades?
That's right.
Right. You get provinces like Quebec, as I understand it, when you apply to the province for a permitted rental increase within its guidelines, and you can do things like claim major infrastructure upgrades, like we're replacing
Toronto and Ontario has that. You could do above guideline increases. They're just like very political.
That's right. They're less formulaic.
That's
let's say. So that means they get used less frequently. Listen, slumlords should not be the norm, but I think
you're right. There are like these structural challenges to managing property when your permitted annual rent increases are lower than the inflation of all your costs to maintain the building. The other thing I was going to bring up that I thought was interesting is that like the largest slumlord with the largest stock of dilapidated units in the city, by far, is the Toronto Community Housing. So again, it's one of these things with like the fight between the city and the province, and here the city and private landlords. It's like,
you have thousands of your own units that you mismanage,
get your house in order.
I mean, in fact, I dug this up when she first announced it. I mean, TCHC, the Toronto Community Housing Corporation, published a sort of strategic overview in 2025, and in their own report, classified 69% of their units as in poor or critical condition, needing massive investments, right? So, and like we've been in these buildings, like we know people who live in some of these buildings, and like it's literally as bad as people having to duct tape their window seals because there's too much cold air that comes in the winter, right? So, I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to enforce rules on landlords to have certain standards
but you need
of
to set
living.
An example.
You need to set an example. TCHC is the largest renter of low-income housing in the city, and its units are terrible.
With a huge backlog. So it was interesting. Laneway Garden Suites by numbers. You found this report that was published by the U of T.
I just thought it was interesting. We'll put the link in the show notes just so people can check it out. But the School of Cities out of U of T they published just sort of a tracker of how many of these things have been applied for, built, and are sort of in the pipeline of being built in the city. The numbers are still small, but it's interesting to see. Like if you look at the chart starting in 2018 when there were 0 laneway suites or garden suites in the city, and then seeing as permissions came into the city and effectively as permissions loosened in the city too, because the first iterations of these things were pretty restrictive. So completed new laneway and garden suites in 2018, 0, 2019, 6. This is citywide. Going up to 2025, 236 of these units getting built in the year. And then I think in the pipeline, so these are active building permits issued in 2025, there were 489 permits issued, meaning these are probably ones getting built in 2026. So the numbers sort of doubling every year, like hundreds, but hundreds doubling. Presumably by 2027, we're into 1,000 new garden suites or laneway suites per year. I think, within the next 5 or 10 years, you're going to start, you'll be hard pressed to find a lane in the city where there's not housing. Yeah. And that'll start to change the dynamics of neighborhoods quite significantly, I think.
I think laneway suites are cool because they activate lanes. Garden suites, I have an anti-garden suite argument. And this was really informed by the conversation we had with Alicia at Courtyard Urbanism.
Yeah, I remember that.
If you build in all of the city 4 units in a multiplex plus 1 garden suite, you don't pay any development charges. Or let's say in 9 of these 25 wards, if you build 6 units plus 1 garden suite, you don't pay any development charges. If you build 7 units in the main building, you pay all development charges, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So what this policy does, and it's really the development charge exemption. Like I think you should have permission to build garden suites and laneway suites. I'm not nitpicking that, but the development charge exemption policy puts you in a position to provide your tenants with less backyard space, to provide the city with less soft landscaping and less space for trees, which they say they want, and for what?
Yeah.
For what?
Presumably to save 1 floor on the building or something like that.
And even then, a lot of people would fit them in. Like if you think about a 3-story building with a basement, you could do 2 per floor and then 1 in the basement and the other half of the basement is your utility space. A lot of people would take that. There's no impact on corporate finance because in either case, you're not collecting development charges. It's just interesting how these policies lead to these unintended consequences where we have this project on Glen Park. I think there's a configuration and there's some building code implications where we could have just had more soft landscaping. We could have had more trees, more backyard space, but we don't. And one of the big reasons is the way the development charge deferrals and exemptions are drafted.
Yeah, it's funny. I was on a podcast a couple of weeks ago with Zoe Coombs, who friend of the podcast and supporter of the Missing Middle Summit. And she's like, when we started talking about garden suites in the city, everybody was talking about, hey, these are going to be for grandma. Grandma's going to live above the garage. And it's like, did anybody ever ask grandma if she wants to live above the garage? This,
have you talked to a grandma? Yeah, she doesn't want to climb stairs.
And I mean, in fairness, the reason I like them is exactly what you're saying. I like them because it is a way to introduce net new density within the existing rules.
That's right.
But there's ways to introduce that density in a smarter way.
That's right.
That's a slight tweak on the rules because now you're effectively taking every backyard and putting a giant oversized garage.
You're neutralizing the backyard.
Yeah. When you could just add that unit to the main building, but you're penalized for doing it.
Right? Yeah. So it's just, again, and again, while fighting every step of the way for soft landscaping and trees.
Yeah. And laneways, I do think is very different because these are, in many places, they're sort of they're grungy and
laneways,
it's a nice way to bring life to lanes.
Exactly, because activated laneways are actually awesome because our actual streets are too wide. So laneways are these nice, cool potential neighborhood streets.
Anyway, so this study, for what it's worth, is a combination of both. I don't think they segregate out the numbers, but that might be interesting to see is are we seeing more? I would expect that laneway housing will be a more organic thing to evolve just because of the accessibility of the lanes. But it'd be interesting to see these numbers broken out just between
And another thing I'll say is that these numbers are just nothing burger.
Yeah, they're very small in the grand scheme of the problem.
So it's good that these permissions exist. It's not good if we use these permissions to take our foot off the gas on actual, apartment buildings and stuff like
until
that.
These things get into thousands per year, it doesn't move the needle at all, right?
That's
so
right.
Maybe we're on the ramp up to that. We'll see if we end up with a plateau one of these years where it just stops growing. But
maybe let's end on a quick update for our buddy Leo's multiplex project. Well, it's really a small apartment building on Palmerston. I think we talked about it on this podcast where there was this Toronto Life article about Leo Green Street Flats had proposed an apartment building on Palmerston just south of Bloor. It faced a ton of neighborhood opposition.
Probably one of the nimbiest places you can think of in the city.
Despite being very much in line with the broad strokes of the multiplex policy, without being very much in line.
The Toronto Life article was like, well, it's probably worth sharing that article.
Yeah, because it kind of painted the neighbors as villains, which, I think they are. He was ultimately refused his variances at the Committee of Adjustment, but he went again a week ago, I think it was, maybe 2 weeks ago, and he won. He had slightly modified the plans, and I think that there was enough pushback on both that specific original Committee of Adjustments hearing and the Committee of Adjustments generally, based on the stuff we talked about with Blair Scorgie, that the committee was a little bit more circumspect on some of this stuff, and he won. So, one thing I predicted when he lost the first time is that he's going to win. He knows what he's doing, and this will just be a big waste of time and money.
Yeah,
which it has been.
And Leo's been taking the blunt end of this on a lot of his projects, having to go to committee multiple times. Like we one of our earliest episodes about 91 Barton Street that went to committee twice to get denied twice to then go to TLAB to get approved
to get it
to obviously get it. It's within 2 MTSAs, walking distance from Bathurst and Christie subway station, on a street that has other small apartment buildings on an oversized lot. Like,
one thing that was interesting on this one is, first of all, he represented himself at committee.
Interesting.
Which I thought was interesting. I should actually ask him why. He's got a great planner, Greg Ewins, our planner, but he represented himself. And I watched it a day after, and there was the typical neighbors. There was one guy who's like a surgeon at Sick Kids, I think it was, or one of the UHN hospitals, talking about all the adverse impact to himself. And the committee member asked him where he lived, and he's like 2 doors down. He's like, so none of these impact you? He's like, yes, but they impact my neighbor, who will then be impacted by this new neighbor. And the committee chair was like pretty good at kind of like putting things into perspective. There was one young guy in the article that we'll share from Toronto Life. A lot of people made a joke that it's kind of like 5 really old people with white hair, and then like one young guy, and like, well, who the hell's this guy? And that guy showed up, and apparently he's a musician, and he's a little bit quirky because he also spoke again in opposition to Leo's plans. And his specific point of objection was Leo is seeking some relief to the side yard setback requirement. And he basically was saying, my concern is for those tenants who, if there is a fire, will die because they can't exit the building. And you kind of, and he was like very serious about this. And you kind of wonder what he thinks about townhouses, which have shared party walls. Like, obviously you egress through the front or the back.
What he thinks about the Ontario Building Code and Toronto's building department that reviews building permit applications.
Maybe we should have clipped it. He's like, I'm not here for myself. I'm here for these tenants who will die if there is a fire. And it's like, well, we have a fire code, and also we have townhouses. Like, why? Like, are you concerned about or like semi-detached houses? It was very bizarre, and like it's a bizarre process in which we have to kind of like put up with this stuff with these people who know nothing.
And my take, and from reading that Toronto Life article back in February, we'll share the link. Is that Leo went through a lot of lengths to talk to neighbors to get input on design, to design the building to feel like a building that should be on Palmerston.
Yeah.
You do see a lot of multiplexes that go up that really don't look like the neighborhoods they're going into.
And for what it's worth, Palmerston has variety.
Yeah.
It actually has some of these old like post-war apartment buildings.
Yeah.
So like the character is already one of like a mix of typologies.
So close to Bloor. I mean, I imagine he's also in 2 MTSAs.
He made the point. He's like 6 months from now I could go bigger because the MTSA policy will be in effect.
Right.
I'm starting to get very congested, which I'm sure is impacting my voice. So how are we doing?
I think we're good. I mean, I think the only thing we wanted to end on was just a reminder of the Missing Middle Summit coming up on May 13th.
Yeah, so it's in basically 1.5 months. May 13th, full day of programming. If you are currently building a missing middle project or want to build a missing middle project, this is where you meet everybody. Like, it's actually a pretty small industry, and they all show up. You need to meet an architect, a lender, a planner, an energy modeler, a builder, trades, whatever, lawyer. They will all be there. You want to meet other builders, because actually one of the benefits of this community that's kind of come together around missing middle development is we all text each other when we run into challenges. So that's May 13th. Tickets are at missingmiddlesummit.com. We're going to be publishing more and more of the announced speakers over the next few weeks, but this is the 4th year. It's going to be a good event.
Yeah, worth checking out. So make sure you grab your tickets. They're selling. Early bird tickets are gone. General admission, more than 50% sold out.
And there is a late admission price hike, so get in before that. That's the kind of penalty you pay for waiting for the last minute.
All right, sweet. I think that's it for this week, and we do have a couple of guests in mind for the next couple of weeks, so we'll try to get something lined up,
including Reese Martin. We'll write it down. I want to bring Reese Martin on. He'd be
and I'm trying to get us going with Jason Thorne, the chief planner, which I think would be good. We're trying to get Anna Bailao from Built Canada Homes on, so we'll keep making some progress on these people, and get back to you once we have one of those booked.
Sounds good.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for tuning in.